This woman had an issue of blood for how many years? 12 years. She had gone to all the doctors she could. She had spent all her money to no avail. So she goes up to Jesus. She shouldn't have even been in the crowd because she was a woman of uncleanness. And she had to be cordoned off from everybody else, even from her husband. They could not have sexual relations as long as she was defiled. And so she comes up from what position, or to what position? She's making her way through the crowd.
Just to touch his garment.
All right? From what direction? Behind him. She touched the hem of his garment. Matthew, Luke doesn't call this our attention. That's why when you study the story in the New Testament, take every account and study Matthew's account, then Luke's account, and then Mark's and John's, whoever talks about the same story, and piece all the puzzle together. If you depend upon one account, you're going to miss a lot of information. Matthew says that she came up from behind him and touched. Now, Luke says touched his garment. Matthew says touched the border or the hem of his garment. And that Greek word means tassel. Tassel. The 4 tassels hanging down, because the Jews, as I said last week, believed that when a person touched a tassel, they not only were healed, but they received what? The forgiveness of sins. That's how important these tassels were. So after, basically Jesus turns around and says, "Who touched my garment?" How did he know? I mean, obviously he's the Son of God. But what does the Scripture say? He felt the power exuded. And so he knew. Anyway, he basically tells her, "Don't fear, you've been healed, go your way." Now, Jesus continues his journey with his entourage of elders and his apostles as he goes to the house of Jairus. And then he lets only Peter, James, and John go with him into the house along with her mother and father. Luke says that she was, I know what the Greek says, that the point, what does the King James say? The Greek says at the point of death. Let me just put it that way. At the point of death, she was drawing her last breath. So when Jesus and her mother and her father and Peter, James, and John go in, and there are a lot of people in there, waiting women, all that, he has them all step out. He says, before he has them step out, he says, "Hey, don't worry. Don't keep crying. She's just asleep." To which they say, what? Basically, "You're crazy. You're crazy. She's dead. We've been here. We saw her draw her last breath." So Jesus excused all these other people. He raised her, touched her hand, raised her up, presented her to her mother and father, and needless to say, news of this great event spread everywhere he went and performed a miracle. Now, whenever a person died in Judaism, even the poorest person had to hire at least 2 weeping or mourning women and 1 musician. At least one. They had multiple, generally, but even the poorest had to have at least 1 musician and 2 weeping women. And the louder they wept or grieved at one's funeral, the greater the affection was being exhibited toward that deceased person. All right. Any questions so far? If you follow, you're free now. If you follow Luke's account, and we leave chapter 5 and go into chapter 6, you're not going to get a chronological story of what Jesus did next. You have to put all the pieces of the puzzle in Matthew and Mark and Luke and John together to get an accurate itinerary of what Jesus did. We leave Luke chapter 5 and we go to John chapter 5 for the very next theme. John chapter 5, the first 18 verses, deals with a man who was infirm for 38 years. He is found at the pool of Bethesda, which means the house of mercy. And there are textual critics that want to say it should be Bethesda. I'm not going to get into the textual criticism part. And so he's there waiting. Now, this pool of Bethesda has been uncovered by archaeologists. And it has 5 porticos, just like we read about. At the end of this pool, on both sides were stairs leading down into the water. Jesus noticed it, and all along this colonnade. What's the colonnade? All right, it's a big open porch, just like this aisle. Well, just like this building, with columns, great big columns supporting the roof, but it was open. And they were lined up by the dozens. It was actually a hospital for the infirm. And they were all lined up. So when Jesus approaches this man, he says, well, asks him one question. You might think it's a little silly. Do you want to be healed? But he asked that question to draw the man's attention. He knew the man wanted to be healed. But remember, there may be as many as 200 people in these colonnades. He doesn't know Jesus from Wayne. And so now Jesus has his attention. He says, you want to be healed? To which the man says, I'm trying to get down there to the water. But when I try to descend the steps, somebody steps in front of me. And it's constantly that way. I can't get down to the water. The Jews believed, they were highly superstitious, very superstitious. They believed that there were demons everywhere. Demons in these lives. Demons in the pews. Demons in the carpet. Demons in that water. There were demons everywhere. They believed that every blade of grass had a guardian angel. I'm telling you, they were highly superstitious. They believed occasionally the water would be troubled. What does that mean? It would be stirred up. From what source? Even the Jews knew this. There was a natural subterranean stream underneath that, and the Jews well knew it, but occasionally there would be a disturbance in that stream which would work its way up to the water, and it would churn the water, and it would blow the water, and they believed that the angel of God caused that. It did come from a stream, but the angel of God caused during that. And R.C.H. Lindsay says that this is the use of the aorist, which means that the disturbance of the water was only brief, temporarily. It didn't stay very long. It didn't stay 30 minutes, for example. And so it was imperative that the person who wanted to be healed get down there quickly, and bless his heart, he couldn't do that. So Jesus heals him. All right? Immediately, the man goes into the temple. Why do you think he went into the temple? And we can only speculate on this, so whatever you say. Okay. Right. Pardon? All right. He could have easily gone there to sacrifice. He could have gone there to offer prayer to God. He went there in honor of God in some fashion. I mean, did you have any more specific info, Carl? Whatever he did was in honor of God healing him. The Jewish leaders come to him and say, what are you doing carrying your pallet on the Sabbath? He said, well, There's a guy that came up to him and healed me and said, take up your bed and walk. That's my answer. He said, who healed you? He said, I don't know. We wait. Jesus finds the guy. And then he tells him to sin no more, lest worse things come upon you. The implication is what? There was some connection between his affliction and his sin. We don't know any more than that, but the words go and sin no more, lest something worse come upon you. So the Jews were irate. From that time on, they began persecuting Jesus. The grammatical construction of that phrase in the Greek means they continued to persecute Jesus from that point on. All right. What tipped these Jews off? Two things. He healed on the Sabbath. That's a no-no. Remember? These were followers of the school of Shammai. Because the school of Hillel didn't think it was wrong to heal a sick person on the Sabbath day. So these had to be Shammaites. Whether they be Pharisees or Sadducees, they were followers of the school of Shammai. But also, here we go again with the oral law, the tradition of the elders, the man-made laws of Jews. He took something that happened in private and made it public, and that is a no-no. Jesus chides the Pharisees and the Sadducees, making burdens that the people cannot bear. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of oral laws. You could not spit in the dirt on the Sabbath. Why? Because it would cause the spittle would go into the ground, causing a furrow, and a little dust would fly on each side, and that would constitute plowing. It's this kind of stuff. You could not read 2 pages that were joined together. You could only read 1 page. So if we're reading the text here on the Sabbath, I could read 1 page, but it would be against the law to read that page back to back. So the people could not possibly keep all of these oral laws plus God's law. Now, Exodus chapter 20, verses 9 and 10, the Jews were told that they could not bear a burden on the Sabbath day. Neither them, nor their children, nor their maidservants, men-servants, nor their animals. And anyone who violated this law was to be stoned to death. That's God's law. But the Jews came along, the rabbis came along and said, well, we have to further define what God meant. And that's when they came up with all these foolish laws. What's a burden? What would be a true violation of carrying the burden on the Sabbath day? All Jesus did was, to this man, was heal him. The guy didn't even manifest any faith. He didn't know who Jesus was. Jesus said, take up the bed and walk. You can. All right? The issue centers around any kind of life, any kind of work that would enhance your livelihood, that would bring you more income, that would help you and your family. It's specifically pointed out in Exodus 20, verse 10. Nor your animals. When you use an animal to work, to farm, to plow, that means you're doing it for your income or for your benefit. That is carrying a burden on the Sabbath day. But when Jesus walks along and says, you're healed, what kind of work was involved in that? There was no work. And this was what Jesus was getting on to the Jews about. I am not working. And yet, on the other hand, he says, let me ask you something. Do not the priests work on the Sabbath day? By doing what? Their duties. They carry in wood from the wood chamber. They make their sacrifices. All right? And even he said, even my heavenly Father works on the Sabbath day by taking care of his creation. And you chide me for healing this man on the Sabbath day? Go ahead, Dale.
Do you suppose that the ordinary people, and I don't really understand, the ordinary people are big into the priests and all that, but somewhat, but I thought this has been going on for some time, as far as God's law, they had God's law, and all the other traditions that came in. Do you suppose that the ordinary Jew knew the difference?
The Pharisees and the Sadducees kept pushing it down their throat. But they knew the difference, Dale. They very well knew the difference between what God said and what these Pharisees are trying to mandate on us.
What do you think they wrote? They thought they were doing it wrong to disobey the Pharisees and pushing it?
Good question. I'll let Carl answer.
What was the question?
Do you think the average Jew thought he was wrong by violating one of the moral laws of the Jews, or only if he violated God's law? It's subjective, but
Well, there were things that's what I was looking up in Luke 13, even Jesus says, you loose your ox and take it down the water.
yeah, right. They got to have water every day, don't they?
Yeah, so I mean, there were things wherein the religious elite were interpreting and binding things, and because of the position that they had, they were able to force or to put pressure on people to comply to things. And I'm sure, people weren't as people are today. Some probably followed them blindly, and some probably said, "I'm not doing that. That's ridiculous."
Well, I think the example he brought up, I don't think the average Jew, Dale, had any qualms about taking the donkey out and watering him. I don't think it bothered that Jew. But it bothered the leaders, the religious people.
What appears to me the law is having control over the people.
That's the bottom line. And that is one reason the Sadducees kissed up to the Romans. Because the Romans would let them keep their positions and their control over the people. If they tried to break the backbone of the Romans, they would lose their position and their influence and their authority. It was all about control.
The leaders are blinded by the pride.
That is, they're blinded by their pride. So from that time on, they began to persecute Jesus. I have 5 reasons that I have researched as to why the Jews wanted to kill Jesus. I have the scriptures. I'll give them to you after class if you want them. If I can remember them. He made himself equal with God. That didn't sit well with him. All right. He cleansed the temple. He healed on the Sabbath. He claimed to forgive sins. And he said God loves the Gentiles. And they sought to kill him for that. That's how much they hated the Gentiles. You're telling me our Heavenly Father loves the Gentiles? We're going to kill you for that. And Jesus had to deal with these people for 3.5 years during his ministry.
Well, it was also completely changing the lifestyle of a lot of people, including their income.
Right. He was taking, diminishing their authority. That's what he was doing. And I think, Dale, that was a real strong word counteract. Okay? They had been teaching all this time, you can't do this on the Sabbath, you can't do this. Here comes this guy from Nazareth, a no good account person in the first place. He came from Galilee, and he's breaking everything within indoctrinating into these people's hearts. And they weren't going to stand for it. Jesus spent so much time in the synagogue. I think that it is apropos that we spend some time trying to understand the synagogue. As I've said before, the synagogue was not a place of worship, it was a place of instruction. I quote Alfred Edersheim on this. Nothing I teach comes off the cuff. I have background research from Jewish experts. I study what Jewish professors and experts say. I don't study what Gentiles say. This is what the Jews did. I study what the Jews say they did. The word synagogue means gathering together. And as I said, there were several elders. In fact, this term elder, koinos, is the very same word that describes Dale and Terry and Don. They are elders. That's what these guys were. And from the eldership, one was chosen to be not the head elder, but the moderator, if I may use that term. 7 people were selected to speak or to read from the scrolls on the Sabbath day. So the ruler of the synagogue would go back into the Torah closet, and he would open that door or curtain, and behind it would be a makeshift ark, little box. And in that box would be the scrolls. He would bring these scrolls out to the readers. And the chances are that there were marked places where they left off the previous Sabbath. So one reader would get up and read, and then he would call on another reader. The readers could make comments on the passages after they read. Now, every Sabbath there were 2 readings. They read from the Torah and they read from the prophets. Now, if you will, turn to Luke chapter, where is that passage? Let me see if I can find that passage. Where Jesus read from Isaiah. Some of you might find it quicker than I do. I can't think of the passage, but Jesus gets up and he reads from, here it is, Luke 4. All right. Turn to Luke 4:16. Let's read 16 and 17. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and he entered, as his custom was, into the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and stood up to read. All rabbis stood up to read. They did what when they taught? They sat down when they taught. There's an exception to that, which I'll give you in just a minute. And there was delivered unto him the book of the prophet Isaiah. That's why I think that they had certain sections, certain places marked. This ruler brought the scroll to Jesus, and he had it opened up to the book of Isaiah. And he opened the book and found a place where it was written. All right. This was the prophets section of the reading on the day of the Sabbath, on Saturday the Sabbath. There had already been those who read from the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Now Jesus gets up and he reads his portion from the prophets. Now, there was one exception to the reader standing. All right? And that is during the Feast of Purim, when they read the book of Esther, the reader had to sit down. Always sat down when they read Esther. Always. He stood for every other reading, but not for the book of Esther. Synagogue had to be the highest building in the town. So, what if there was a house that was 2 feet high? Solve this one. All right, so they attached something to the synagogue. Called called a board. And that's where the steeple came from, Stan. They put a board that had to be higher than anything else in the town. And that's where our steeple came from. What does that represent? Why did it have to be the highest? Indicative of what? And the nearest to God. We all give God a deep up. I mean, we know He's everywhere. And so they put this board on the edge of the synagogue building. There was no laughing, talking, kidding around, and rule us out. In the synagogue, they expected people to wear their best attire. Children under 5 were not allowed in the synagogue. When they reached their 5th birthday, they could go to the synagogue. They also, on their 5th birthday, began reading the Hebrew text, beginning with the toughest book one of the toughest books in the Bible, Leviticus. 5 years old, and they're studying Leviticus. I didn't study Leviticus till I was in preacher training school. All right? But that is the way it was. Now, tax collectors and demoniacs were not entitled to enter the synagogue. But what about lepers? Yes, they were. And what was the condition on which these lepers could attend the synagogue? Back there was a little cubicle, 6 by 6, and that's where they had to stay. Like the old phone booths, all right? They went inside that, but even tax collectors and demoniacs were not allowed into the synagogue. In the synagogue, priests and Levites did not receive any recognition. They were just common people like everybody else. Their place was in the temple, where they received tremendous honor, but not in the synagogue. In the synagogue, the prayer leader held his hands up to his shoulders. In the temple, he held his hands up to his head. Now you can think about that, because shoulder starts with S and synagogue starts with S. But they were very, very meticulous. Now, would someone turn to Ezekiel 8, 16? Was that the first? 8:16. In the synagogue, they had to pray toward the west. That's it. You pray toward the west. Period. Today, what about a Jew living here in Texas? They pray in a certain direction, just like the Muslims. They pray toward Jerusalem, whatever direction that is. The Muslims pray in what direction? Or toward what city? Mecca. All right? But in the synagogue, you're always toward the west because of Ezekiel 8:16. Someone has that to read.
And he brought me into the inner court of the house of the Lord, and behold, at the entrance of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men, with their backs to the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east, worshiping the sun toward the east.
Okay. Sun worshippers prayed toward the east. Therefore, no Jew could pray toward the east in the synagogue. That's their mentality. The Sabbath, the synagogue always met 3 days a week. You remember, right? Saturdays, Mondays, and Thursdays. Why Monday and Thursday? Because when Moses went up on Mount Sinai to receive the second copy of the law, and he broke the first set, they say Moses ascended Sinai on Thursday and came back down on Monday. That's why they meet every Monday and Thursday in the synagogue. No questions yet? Okay. Pardon?
And they have come back and buy it here.
Pardon me, Jim?
It's a joke.
Oh, it's a joke. Okay. All right. There's no sense in me getting any new information. We're going to pick up next week with one of the 7 centuries mentioned in the New Testament. Every century mentioned in the New Testament is spoken of positively. And yet they represent the most horrible government that the Jews were ever under. All right. Choke myself yet on this.